Hello and welcome to Charm and Circumstance. I'm your host, Ashley Morgan from Ashley Morgan Interiors. And I want to talk about something that even the most confident designers sometimes shy away from, and that is pattern. I often encounter clients who have an idea of what they love. They could pin away on Pinterest or send me the most patterned, textural designs, inspiration images. And yet, if they are making the decisions themselves, they cannot get beyond solid grays or solid beiges or possibly a solid pop of color on a sofa or a chair or something like that. Pattern seems to scare people to death. Isn't that funny? Most people aren't afraid to pick out the sofa. They can usually decide on a paint color, but the minute you start talking about florals or stripes or plaids, wallpaper, mixing fabrics, people freeze. I hear it all the time. I'm afraid it won't match. What if it looks too busy? How do designers make all those patterns work together? If you've ever asked yourself any of those questions, today's episode is for, because here's the good news. There isn't really a magic formula, but there are a few principles that make it easier. And once you understand these, pattern becomes one of the most enjoyable parts about decorating. So let's dive in. From floor plans to finishing touches, function to the feeling you get walking into a room, I'm Ashley Morgan, an interior designer with a love for beautiful living and a belief that great design should tell your story. I've spent over 20 years in the industry, and now I'm pulling back the curtain on interiors, sharing insight, inspiration, and the strategy behind well-designed spaces. Expect smart design talk, refined tips, and just the right mix of polish and personality. So pour something sweet and join me for a thoughtful conversation with a generous helping of charm and circumstance. Have you ever walked into a room that was beautifully furnished, but somehow it just fell flat? Everything was nice, the furniture was lovely, the paint color was even pretty, but there was something missing. More often than not, what is missing is pattern is what gives a room energy. It's what keeps your eye moving. It's what makes a space feel layered instead of one-dimensional. Think about nature for a minute. Flowers, leaves, stone, tree bark, the grain on wood. Nothing is solid. Nothing is perfectly uniform. Nature mixes pattern effortlessly, and that's one of the reasons we find it so beautiful. Our homes work the same way. I think one of the biggest myths that people tend to believe is that everything has to match. Designers do not try to make everything match. Actually, we try to make everything belong together. There's a huge difference. When every fabric is identical, a room can feel lifeless. The magic happens when things coordinate instead. Maybe your rug has a soft blue in it, and that same blue appears in a floral pillow. And then it's repeated in a piece of artwork across the room. Nothing matches exactly, but everything feels connected, and that's what we're aiming for. Now, if you've ever wondered how designers can mix 5 or 6 patterns without making a room feel chaotic, here's one of the biggest secrets. We mix the scale of patterns. So let's say you have a large floral. You don't pair it with an equally large floral. Instead, you add a medium stripe. Then maybe you add a tiny geometric print or a subtle check, a large, a medium, and a small. It's almost like having different voices in a conversation. If everyone talks at the same volume, it's exhausting. But when some voices are quiet and some voices are bold, the conversation just flows. Rooms work the same way. And here's something else I think that people tend to forget, is that texture is equally important. A woven basket has texture. Linen has texture. Grass cloth wallpaper has texture. A chunky knit throw has texture. If you're someone who says, I don't really like pattern, chances are you actually do. You may just prefer subtle ones, and that's perfectly okay. So one of my favorite combinations is mixing something feminine with something really structured. Maybe it's a floral paired with a ticking stripe, or a plaid mixed with botanical prints, or even a traditional rug underneath clean line furniture. Those little contrasts make a room feel collected instead of just purchased all at once. Honestly, if everything comes from the same collection, it usually feels like it was just purchased off the page of a catalog. Beautiful, sometimes interesting. No, the homes that stay with us are the ones that feel like they've evolved over time. So let's talk about trends, because patterns go through trends just like everything else. Remember when chevron was everywhere? And then it was black and white buffalo check. Lately, we've seen checkerboard patterns, oversized geometrics, and bold abstract prints. There's absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying trends. I actually think that they can be fun. The question is, where do you use them? If you're spending thousands of dollars on custom draperies or upholstering your forever sofa, I'd lean towards timeless. Stripes, botanicals, classic florals, plaids, small geometrics. These have been around for generations for a reason. But if you fall in love with a trendy print, buy the pillow, buy the throw, buy the lampshade. These are much easier to update in a few years. I don't think people struggle with pattern because they don't have good taste. I really don't. I think they're afraid of making an expensive mistake. And I can understand that. A sofa isn't inexpensive. Wallpaper is definitely not inexpensive. Custom draperies certainly aren't inexpensive. So suddenly every decision feels enormous. We start looking online, Pinterest, Instagram, magazines. One designer says, never mix florals. Another says, always mix florals. Someone else says, every room needs animal print. Before long, we're completely overwhelmed. Sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't lack of creativity. It's just simply too much information. So where on earth do you start? If I could give you one piece of advice today, it would be this. Don't start by choosing 5 fabrics. Start with one thing that you absolutely love. This is exactly how I start my design projects. Maybe it's a rug, maybe it's wallpaper. Maybe it's a beautiful floral fabric that you've been thinking about for months. So let that be your anchor, and everything else can grow from this. Is exactly how most designers work. We don't begin with the whole room. We begin with one beautiful thing and then build the story from there. Your home doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look like the latest magazine cover, because guess what? That was actually staged for that photo shoot. That is very, very likely not how that room always looks, or even looks most of the time. It doesn't have to look like your favorite influencer's home. It just has to feel like you. Some of the most memorable homes that I've visited or designed, they weren't perfect, but they were layered, collected, personal. The fabrics had story. Nothing looked forced. And that is the goal. Not perfection, but personality. Thanks for listening in today. And if this episode inspired you to be a little bolder with your patterns, or you have a friend who's maybe in the middle of making decisions for their own home, would you share this episode with them? Thanks for joining again, and I will see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining me on Charm and Circumstance. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and follow along on Instagram, because charm is personal and circumstance is what you make of it.